Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Sophia Braslauer. I'm one of the co-directors of the Israel Summit. I'm also a senior at Columbia University studying political science and business management. I'm so excited and really so honored to be introducing Barak Regev today, the managing director of Google Israel. Having spent the last 9 years at Google, Barak has extensive experience as part of the Google EMEA Emerging Markets team, working globally for Google Cloud and working closely with Israeli startups. Before joining Google, Barak worked at two startups early on in his career before taking on various roles at Microsoft. I, as well as the audience, are so excited to be sitting down with you and learning a bit more about Google Israel and the Israeli tech ecosystem. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Sophia. And just one small minor correction: 10 years in Google, celebrated just last September.
Wow,
So time is
congratulations.
passing by. Yeah, time is passing by.
Great. So let's dive right in. And could you begin by telling us a bit more about your role and about the Google Israel team at large?
Yeah, sure. So I have the privilege of being the managing director of the Israeli site that's called Google Israel. It was established 15 years ago, and it was one of the first expansion projects for Google going outside of Silicon Valley or the US for R&D centers as well as business functions. And 15 years later, we're fortunate to have over 1,400 Googlers having core R&D activity in the world of search, of YouTube, and all the core products of Google, as well as having a very big business team overlooking all the business development, customer serving, and the development of the ecosystem in the Startup Nation. And we believe we've been a pivotal part of the growth of Startup Nation and also are a key anchor tenant in the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to hear how, large Google is in Israel and, the fact that it was the first move outside of Silicon Valley, I had no idea. And I think, on that note, many people will probably be surprised to hear that Google has such large headquarters in Israel. Could you maybe expand on why that is and what makes the Israeli tech ecosystem so attractive to giants like Google?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, it's a repeated question by many because we're a young, quite small country with not a lot of resources, and some would argue that we live in a tough neighborhood. If you read the news and are aware of the geopolitical climate that this part of the world has. But having said that, Israel has always leaned on its education as a core assets for its resource building. And we've proven over and over time that we know how to incubate, seed, and grow innovation. Some of the world most dominating feature that we exhibit on a daily basis were probably part of an innovation coming out from some tech in Israel. We have two of the most distinguished academic institutions in the world of in the front of research, if we're talking about the Technion and if we're talking about the Weizmann Institution, as well as we have very engaged government for the good and the bad that helps us scale initiatives very effectively. So when Google, and we need to remember, founded by Larry and Sergey, coming from a PhD in Stanford, had a high respect towards the ecosystem, or at least the academic ecosystem in Israel. And when they were starting to look at branching out the research and development of search, Israel was a prime candidate for that. And then the ease of doing business, the flair of entrepreneurship, the fact that we have at this point 44 existing unicorns in the making, and also the innovation in Israel has really matured. It became from really driven by tech to building business viable alternatives to all kinds of world-class solutions. And then the evolution now of the Israeli entrepreneur as a long-term investor is really evolving. So this is why Google is here. This is the center of the universe when it comes to innovation, when it comes to tech, when it comes to funding. It's probably second only to the Silicon Valley at a much more reasonable cost and affordability of real estate, even though we're
Yeah,
so expensive.
something that I've heard you pick up on in the past and highlight that makes Israel and the tech ecosystem so special is Israeli culture. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on, what is so unique about Israeli culture and how that affects the space?
Sure. So I appreciate the fact that not all the audience knows or have had interaction with Israelis. I'm fortunate I call myself an Israeli with American twist, given that I was growing up most of my childhood in the US. But when you think about, again, Israel, there's probably three key ingredients that make the culture so unique. One, it's the aspiration for high achievement, which I think is a result of our dissatisfaction. We grew up with a lot of distent around us, so we were always seeing problems and looking for solutions. So there's a high leaning on problem solving, innovation, and finding ways, which is embedded in our culture. The second thing is probably if you heard about the term chutzpah. And if you've had interactions with Israelis, you probably relate to that. But we're really direct. Direct, I say in an honorable way, but very direct culture that really helps you skip a lot of, call it, inefficient processes because of the direct approach. And last, it's a melting pot. It's a melting pot of a 70-year plus old country that has many different cultures coming in, and with the Israeli Defense Forces being mandatory for all citizens, it becomes a real blend of the society and really creates like this, call it a factory of the continuous culture of Israel. So these are the three ingredients that make us so unique.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that you've worked in the UK and Europe and the States really puts you in a unique position that you can pick out, what's so special about Israel and the culture there. So, thank you for sharing those insights. And on the topic of Israeli culture is quite different in many regards than American or other global markets. How do you employ strategies at Google Israel to engage your demographic that might be different than those for other countries?
You figure it out quick. And it's not only figuring it out quick, just so we understand, when I talk about a fairly young country, you can obviously understand what young means. But when I talk about tiny, just so we get a perspective, Israel is at the land size of New Jersey. So it just gives you a perspective of how big or not big this country is. And add the fact that 2/3 of this country is basically desert. It means that everything is condensed in the bigger part or the northern part of Israel, and makes very effective your way of doing business, your way of interacting. I always say that give me 2 hours and 2 phone calls, and probably can reach anybody you need across this market. Now, having said that, Israel is still a vibrant, growing country, 9 million population. We have very different demographics here. It's not only a Jewish population, we also have a very strong Arab population, somewhere in the ballpark of 20%. We have ultra Orthodox. We have different types of societies. And one of the biggest challenges we have as Startup Nation is the fact that while our high tech sector and everything that we're doing around innovation is blooming, it's still fairly small compared to the total population. It's only around 10% of the population are really benefiting and working directly in the world of innovation, in the world of startups, in the world of high yield multinational companies being present here in Israel. So we're always strategic thinking of how we can grow the footprint towards the economy, because that's where Google has been very beneficial towards Israel. We have helped grow the market. We have helped seed more companies by helping them move from idea to product to launch. And we think always, first and foremost, how do we bring a bigger impact on the economy as a whole, not only Google? So my aspiration is to have 3,000 employees in Israel, not 1,400. And I want to see all the ecosystem grow because it will have a material impact on the economy. Besides that, we're also focusing a lot of our attention in changing a bit our pattern locally. So one of the two prime objectives for us in the last 3 years has been increasing the footprint of ultra-Orthodox and Arabs within Google Israel, and we've been very successful in doing so. We're also one of the first companies to reach gender parity, which means that we're hiring as much women as we're hiring men. We're really, really embedded into the DNA of our employees. We try to support any cause or cultural effect that can help not only the employees, but the community as a whole.
Many core features at Google have been developed in Israel by Israelis. I know Live Relay, to name a few. Could you go into a bit more detail about some of those and elaborate?
Yeah, I'm proud of so many of our achievements. First, it's a global effort. We need to understand that Google distributes part of its development around core Google products through different sites, and obviously Israel, as I mentioned, is one of the first sites to have core search development team. I believe there's a few videos probably on YouTube that you can find also some a bit more detailed in videos and what has been done. But obviously, I'm so proud that we've able, I think, to really make the web better first and foremost, because my favorite feature that was developed here was autocomplete. If you think about the days before, that we actually had to type a full length sentence, paragraph in order to complete a search, that has really made the web better and our interaction with the search engine better. I think that now I'm really excited about the forefront of innovation being developed here. And I don't know if any heard about the project called Duplex. It's been showcased in by Sundar in IO. Wow, it was last year or 2 years ago, but it's basically a machine learning AI, call it, solution that really helps as a personal assistant for somebody, and it's really developing great. One of the best and most used products around the world, Google Trends, which is an analytics layer to any website owner to understand a bit the traffic coming his way, or understanding the different trends across the internet has been developed here. And live results is something that any sports fan, that any of you get Google cards, is being fed through a development that was done here. And last but not least, during this time, a lot of the crisis response around COVID in terms of health information, vaccine information, understanding questions and immediate answer, and really being helpful in providing more information to the world as we were going through this transition of grasping what this pandemic was about, has been really a key part developed here in Israel. So really proud, and a lot of other stuff that's still being worked on.
Yeah, I mean, that's really exciting. And, speaking more candidly, I've interned in Israel many times before. I lived in Israel temporarily, and I pride myself on knowing a lot. And I've learned so much in this conversation. I didn't know anything about any of those features being developed in Israel. So that's very exciting to hear. And before we
Yeah.
end today, I did want to highlight that the students here are from all different countries, all different backgrounds. Many are engaging with Israel for the first time this week, which is really exciting. Do you have any final message you want to send to them?
Yeah, be direct and take things lightly. Well, first, okay, I'll tell you things, because obviously, if you've never been to Israel and you don't know much about it, it's another country out of a list of 190 or so countries in the world. So I would advise this: put it on your bucket list. If you're into archaeology, if you're into good weather, if you're into good food, if you're into good time, and if you're into, call it something very different. Israel is a really unique place because it's first amazing weather. As a person that lived 5 years in London, I can tell you that we've just had a remarkable January with an average temperature of 22 degrees per day, sunshine. Actually, it's pretty sad because we didn't have enough rain and we are desperate for rain, but rain is coming tonight, so that's good. And then it's so unique because other than the weather, the people are just amazing. They're friendly. They want to host people. We're really good hosts, and we throw on amazing parties. So Israel is a place for innovation. Israel is a place for advanced medical healthcare. Israel is a place that has its challenges. It's a very unstable political landscape, but nothing for us to do about it other than being nice citizens and do our duties of voting whenever there's an election, which happens every few months. But it's a great place and it's a cool place. So I would highlight that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And part of the summit, we have a special opportunities fair that has so many different organizations and companies that encourage students to engage in Israel further. So thank you so much for being here. It was such an honor and so great speaking with you, and thank you for taking the time.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.